Romance can be full of contradictions. The homely man you pass unnoticed on the street, he may have tucked away in his past a story more exciting and thrilling than anything you have ever read in fiction. And so it is for our man Jedediah too. He has his own amusing story in romance, even if it happened some 110 years ago. Jedediah is not a name that shouts out of romance. Nor did he appear to be any more romantic than his name. In fact, he looked distinctly common. So I wonder if anyone would believe that Jed, as he was more commonly known, was actually full of bubbling romance. Our story starts on a midsummer afternoon. Jedediah was riding comfortably along a winding country road. He was perched on the seat of a bright red peddler's wagon, above and behind a dusty red pony he called Bud. From the bright red wagon came a certain metallic rumbling and clinking, as it rode along with all its tinware on the wagon top. The tin flashed back the sunlight so dazzlingly that Jedediah seemed to be the beaming sun of a little planetary system of his own. A new broom, sticking up aggressively at each of the four corners, gave the wagon a resemblance to a triumphant chariot. Jedediah, himself, had not been in the tin peddling business long enough to acquire the apologetic appearance that is so common to a tin peddler. In fact, this was his first attempt in this line, and he still looked plump and self-respecting. He had a round red face under his plug hat, twinkling blue eyes, and a little pursed-up mouth, pursed up no doubt from much jolly whistling. He wore a suit of large light-colored checks, topped up with a bright pink necktie that sported an amethyst pin. As Jedediah rode through the village of Amberley, he looked about with interest. He knew it well, although it was 15 years since he had last seen it. He had been born and brought up in Amberley, and then he had left it at the age of 25 in search of fortune. But Amberley was Amberley still. As he drove through, he started speaking to his pony Bud, as he often did.
"There's the Stanton Place, Bud. Look, Charlie has painted the house yellow, it used to be white. And Bob Holman has cut the trees down behind the blacksmith forge. Bob never had any poetry in his soul, no romance as you might say. He was what you might call a plodder, you might call him that. Get up, Bud, get up. Look, there's the old Harkness place, seems to be so much smarter than it used to be. In the old days, folks used to say that if you wanted to see how the world would look after the flood, then just go into George Harkness's barnyard on a rainy day. The pond and the old hills ain't changed any though. Get up, Bud, get up. And oh my! There's the Adams homestead. Oh my! What memories! Do I really behold it again?"
Jedediah thought the moment deliciously romantic. He reveled in it. To match his exhilarated mood, he touched the pony with his whip, and went dashing down the hill under the poplar trees, all clinking and glittering. He had not intended to offer his wares in Amberley that day. He meant to start sales in Occidental, the village beyond. But he could not pass the Adams place. When he came to the open gate, he turned in under the willows and drove down the wide shady lane. It was surrounded on both sides with trim white fencing and smothered in lavish sweetbriar bushes, lush with their bloom. Jedediah's heart was beating furiously under his checks as he told himself.
"What a fool you are, Jed Crane. You used to be a young fool, and now you're an old one. It's all so very sad. Get up, Bud, get up. It's a poor lookout for a man of your years, Jed. Don't get excited. It ain't the least likely that Mattie Adams is still here. No doubt she's married and gone years ago. It's probable in fact that there are no Adamses here at all now. But it's romantic, yes, it's romantic. It's splendid, Bud. Get up, my Bud, get up."
The Adams place itself was not unromantic. The house was large, old-fashioned, and white. It had green shutters and a front porch with Grecian columns. These were thought very elegant in Amberley, thought to give the house a classical air. In this instance, the classical effect was somewhat smothered in the honeysuckle flowers which rioted over the whole porch. They hung in pale yellow fragrant festoons over the rows of potted scarlet-red geraniums, which in turn flanked the green steps. Beyond the house, a low-boughed orchard covered the slope between it and the main road, and behind it was a splendor of color, suggesting the presence of a flower garden. Jedediah climbed down from his lofty seat. He walked dubiously to a side door that looked more friendly than the classical front porch. As he drew near, he saw a woman sitting behind the screen, a woman who rose as he approached and opened the door. Jedediah's heart had now been beating even more wildly as he crossed the yard. And then, it stopped altogether, and all the world seemed to have gone still and silent. The woman was Mattie Adams. Mattie Adams, 15 years older than when he had seen her last. Plumper, rosier, somewhat broader-faced, but still unmistakably Mattie Adams. Jedediah felt that the situation was so very delicious. Holding out his hand he said,
"Mattie."
"Why, Jed, how are you?"
replied Mattie, as if they had just parted the week before. It had always taken a great deal to disturb Mattie. Whatever happened, she was calm. Even an old lover, and the only one she had ever possessed, dropping by from the skies after 15 years of disappearance did not ruffle her calm. Holding her hand rather foolishly, Jedediah said,
"I don't suppose you'd know me, Mattie?"
"I knew you the minute I set eyes on you. You're somewhat fatter and older, a bit like myself, but you're Jed still. Where have you been all these years?"
"Pretty near everywhere, Mattie, pretty near everywhere. And you see what it's come to, here I am, driving a tin wagon for the Boone brothers. But never mind that. Business is business. I say, would you want to buy some new tinware?"
To himself, Jed thought this was romantic, asking a woman whom he had loved all his life to buy tins on the occasion of their first meeting after 15 years' separation. Mattie replied in her sweet unchanged voice,
"I don't know. I do want a measuring tin. But all can be done in good time. You must stay and have dinner with me, Jed. I'm all alone now, mother and father have gone. Unhitch your horse and put him in the third stall in the stable."
I ought to be getting on, I'd suppose. I haven't done much work today."
"Oh, but you must stay for dinner. Why, Jed, there's ever so much to tell and ask. And we can't stand here in the yard and talk. Look at Selina. There she is, watching us from the kitchen window. She'll watch as long as we stand here."
Jed turned himself around. Over the little valley below the Adams homestead was a steep treeless hill. And on its very top was perched a farmhouse. It had windows stuck lavishly all over it, and at one of these windows was a long, pale face. Half resentfully, half amusedly, Jed asked,
"Has Selina been pasted up to that window ever since the last time we stood here and talked, Mattie?"
It was characteristic of Mattie to laugh first at the question, and then blush over the memory it revived. She replied,
"Most of the time, I guess. But come in. I never could talk under Selina's eyes, even if they were 400 yards away."
Jed went in and stayed for dinner. The old Adams kitchen had not failed, nor apparently the Adams' skill in cooking. After dinner, Jed hung around till sunset, and then he drove away with a warm invitation from Mattie to call every time his rounds took him through Amberley. As he went, Selina's face appeared at the window of the house over the valley. When he had gone, Mattie went around to the classical porch. She sat herself down under the honeysuckle flowers that dangled above her smooth braids of light brown hair. She knew Selina would be down soon, full of curiosity to find out who the peddler was whom Matty had delighted to honor with an invitation to dinner. Matty preferred to meet Selina out of doors. It was often easier to ward her off there. But meanwhile, she wanted to think over things. You see, 15 years ago, Jedediah Crane had been Matty Adams's man. Jedediah was romantic even then. He was a slim young fellow at the time. He had abundance of curly hair and innocent blue eyes. His romance was rather an attraction than not, at least the then young Matty had found it be so. However, the Adamses looked with no favor on the match. They were a thrifty well-to-do folk, and they thought it would not be suitable for an Adams to marry a Crane. Even then, it would have surely happened, for though Matty appeared to be a meek-looking damsel, she had a mind of her own. It would have happened, had it not been for Selina Ford, Matty's older sister. Selina, people said, had married James Ford for no other reason than that his house commanded a view of nearly every dooryard in Amberley. This may or may not have been true, but nothing that went on in the Adams yard escaped Selina. One night, she watched Matty and Jed in the moonlight. She saw Jed kiss Matty. It was the first time he had ever done so. But sadly, it was also the last. For Selina had swooped down on her parents the next day. She brewed up such a big storm that Matty was forbidden to speak to Jed again. And then, Selina herself gave Jed a piece of her mind. Jed was usually not an overtly sensitive fellow, but he had some slumbering pride, and it was very stubborn when roused. Selina Ford had roused it indeed. It led Jed to vow that he would never creep and crawl at the feet of the Adamses again. He went west, away from Amberley, determined to make his fortune, determined to hurl Selina's scorn back in her face. How interesting it is then that he had now come home driving a tin wagon. Matty smiled thinking of it. But she could never have any ill will for Jed, even for his failure in fortune. She felt sorry for him, and inclined to think that fate had been hard on him. In fact, both fate and Selina, together. Since then, Matty had never had another man. People thought she was engaged to Jed Crane until her time for alliances went by. But Matty did not mind, she had never liked anybody so well as Jed. Don't get me wrong, she had not thought of him for years. But it was strange he should come back like this. Romantic, as he said himself. Matty was pleasantly lost in her own thoughts when she was interrupted by Selina. Angular and pale-eyed, Mrs. Selina Ford was as unlike the plump and rosy Matty as a sister could be. Perhaps her chronic curiosity did not let her rest, and probably was the reason for her crooked, stick-like frame. She demanded as soon as she arrived.
Matty, who was that peddler that was here this afternoon?
Jed Crane. He's home from the west and driving a tin wagon for the boons.
Matty smiled and replied. Selina gave a little gasp.
Matty Adams. And you kept him hanging about the whole afternoon?
Why not? Jed and I always liked each other, you know.
Matty replied wickedly. She rather enjoyed alarming Selina. In the old days Selina could bully her down, but that time was past.
Matty Adams. You don't mean to say you're going to make a fool of yourself again over that Jed Crane? A woman of your age. You should know better.
Don't get excited, Selina. I never saw anyone like you who gets stirred up over nothing.
I'm not excited. I'm perfectly calm. But I might well be excited over your foolishness, Matty Adams. The idea of your taking up again with that old Jed Crane.
He's 15 years younger than your Jim.
Matty replied, giving thrust for thrust. Before Selina had come over, Matty had not properly given a thought to resuming her former relationship with Jed. No doubt there was a tenderness stirred up, but she hadn't had time to fully understand what she felt. But Selina's intrusion worked so well in Jed's behalf that when she left, Matty was now resolved that she wasn't going to put up with Selina's everlasting interference. She would show her that she was independent. When a week had passed, Jed came again. He sold Matty a stew pan. He did not go in for dinner this time, but they stood and talked in the yard for the best part of an hour. Selina glared at them from her kitchen window. Their conversation was most innocent and harmless, mainly gossip about what had come and gone during Jed's time away. But Matty knew what Selina thought, that she and Jed were romancing in a shameless and public fashion. When Jed was about to leave, Matty, more for Selina's benefit than his, broke off some honeysuckle flowers and pinned them to his coat. The fragrance of these flowers went with Jedediah as he drove through Amberley. He smiled internally as pleasant thoughts were born from it. He started his usual chat with Bud again.
But my boy, oh, isn't it romantic? It's nothing but romantic. Not that Matty cares anything about me now. I know she doesn't. But it's just her kind way. She wants to cheer me up. She wants to let me know I still have a friend in her. Get up, Bud, get up. Anyhow, I ain't one to take advantage on her kindness neither. I know my place. But still, say what you will, it's so romantic, this situation, it's all very romantic. This is it. Here I am, loving the ground she walks on as I've always done, and I can't let on that I do because I'm a poor never-do-good fellow. I ain't fit to look at her, an independent beautiful woman like her. And she's showing kindness to me for old time's sake. But not knowing she is piercing my heart all the time. Why, it's romance with a vengeance, that's what it is. Get up, my Bud, get up.
After that, Jed called at the Adams place every week. He usually stayed for dinner. Matty always bought something from him as an excuse. Her kitchen now fairly glittered with all the new tin. She even gave some of it to Selina, just to add more coal to the fire. After every visit, Jedediah resolved that he must not call to see Matty again, at least not for a long time. At the very least, he must not stay back for dinner. Every time he came into Amberley, he struggled with himself. But despite his struggles, it always ended in the same way. Before he knew it, he had turned in under the willow trees. Before he knew it, he had clinked in with his tinware rattling into Matty's yard. A rattling that was very musical to Matty's ears indeed. Meanwhile, Selina watched from her window and raged. On the other hand, Amberley people shrugged their shoulders when they heard gossip about the matter. Being generally good-humoured, they did little more than say that Matty Adams was free to make a fool of herself if it pleased her, and that Jed Crane wasn't such a fool as he looked. The Adams farm was one of the best in Amberley, and it had not grown any poorer under Matty's management. They said, if Jed walks in there and hangs up his hat, he'll have done well for himself after all. This was Selina's view of it too, but of course, not in good nature. She was furious at the whole affair, and she did her best to make Matty's life a burden with her frequent slurs and thrusts. But they all misjudged Jed. He had no intention of walking in and hanging up his hat, or even trying for it. Romantic as he was, it never occurred to him that Matty might be as romantic as himself. He thought she did not care for him, and anyhow he had a little too much pride to ask a rich woman like her to marry him. He thought he was after all just a simple poor man, a man who had lost all his class by taking up tin peddling. Jed was determined not to presume. But he could not stop himself from thinking how deliciously romantic it all was. In the end, he just hugged himself with sorrowful delight over it. As the summer waned and autumn arrived, the long yellow willow leaves began to fall thickly, and Jed began to talk of going out west again. Tin peddling was not possible in winter, and he didn't think he would try it again another summer. Mattie listened with dismay in her heart. All summer she had made much of Jed, and she rather enjoyed tormenting Selina. But now she acutely realized what he really meant to her. The old love had awakened to life in her heart. She just could not lose Jed again. Her tender heart could not bear the thought of not having Jed's company. If Jed went away, everything would be flat and stale, everything would be in vain indeed. She knew him to be at heart the kindest, most gentle of human beings, and the mere fact of his having been unsuccessful in money did not change her feelings toward him, even if everyone else thought that it was stupid. After all, he was Jed, just that was sufficient for her, and if it came to it, she had business capability enough for the both of them. And so it is that Mattie began to drop hints. But Jed would not take them. True, once or twice he thought that perhaps Mattie did still care a little for him. But he was determined not to take advantage of that. He rambled along with the pony.
No, I just couldn't do that. I worship the ground that woman treads on, but it ain't for the likes of me to tell her so, not now. This has been a mighty pleasant summer with that visit to look forward to every week. But it's about to be over now, and it'll just have to be a life of tramping from place to place for me.
Jed sighed. He remembered that it was more romantic than ever, but even this failed to comfort him. Romance up to a certain point was good, beyond that it palled, so to speak. Jed's romance seemed to be failing him just when he needed it the most. Meanwhile, Mattie was forced to the dismal conclusion that her hints were thrown away. She knew her Jed enough to know of the fondness in his heart. But Mr. Jedediah Crane seemed plainly determined not to speak. Mattie felt half angry with him. She did not choose to make a martyr of herself to romance, and surely the man didn't expect her to do the proposing. She mused to herself.
I'm sure and certain he's as fond of me as he ever was. I suppose he's got some ridiculous notion about being too poor to aspire to me. Jed always had more pride than a Crane could carry. Well, I've done all I can, and all I'm going to do. If Jed's determined to go, he must go, I suppose.
Mattie would not let herself cry, although she did feel like it. She went out and picked apples instead. Mattie might have remained so, and Jedediah's romance might never have reached a better ending. But as fate would have it, the very wickedness that had parted them years ago would now work wonders. Selina had come over just then to help Mattie pick the apples. All summer, she had been fairly annoying and provoking Mattie on the issue of Jed, and now she moved to add the last spur in her maliciousness.
Jed Crane's going away, I hear. Seems to me you're bound to be jilted again, Mattie. You've made a nice fool of yourself all summer, throwing yourself at that man, and he doesn't even want you, even with all your property.
Mattie was calm externally, but a strong determination had built into her chest. Her cheeks were now scarlet red, and lips became firm.
He does want me. He is not going away. In fact, we are to be married about this Christmas. And Jed will also take charge of the farm for me.
Matilda,
said Selina. It was all she was capable of saying. The rest of the apples were then picked in a dead silence, Mattie working with an unusually high colour in her cheeks. Selina's thin lips on the other hand were pressed so closely together, so as to be little else than a hairline. After Selina had gone home sulking, Mattie picked on with a very determined face. The die was now cast, she could not and would not bear Selina's slurs. And she had not told a lie either. Her words were true, and she would make them true. All that magnanimous Adam's determination was roused in an instant. She said with resolve on her face,
If Jed jilts me, he'll do it to my face, clean and clever.
When Jed came again, he was very solemn. He thought it would be his last ever visit to see his sweetheart. But of course, Mattie felt differently. She had dressed herself with unusual care and crimped her hair. Her cheeks were scarlet red and her eyes bright. Jed could not take his eyes off her. He thought she looked younger and prettier than ever. The thought that this was the last time he would see her grew more and more unbearable. Yet, he firmly determined he would let no presuming word pass his lips. Mattie had been so kind to him. It was only honorable of him in return not to let her throw herself away on a failure like himself.
I suppose this is your last round with the wagon,
Mattie said. She had taken him out into the garden to say it. The garden was out of view from Selina Ford's house. Propose she must, but she drew the line at proposing under Selina's eyes. Jed nodded with a drooping sad face that was ever so easy for Mattie to read.
Yes, and then I must toddle off and look for something else to do. You see, I haven't much of a gift for business, Mattie. It takes me so long understanding any trade, and I'm generally asked to quit before you might say I've really commenced. This has truly been a mighty happy summer for me, Mattie, though I can't say I've done much in the selling, except to you, of course. With your kindness and these little visits, you've been good enough to let me make every week. I feel I may say it's been the happiest summer of my life, and I'm never going to forget it, Mattie. But as I said, it's time for me to be moving on elsewhere, and finding something else to do.
There is something for you to do right here, if you will do it,
said Mattie faintly. For a moment she felt as if she could not go on. Jed, and the garden, and all the flowers in it, all spun around her and she felt dizzy. She held the sweet pea trellis just in time to steady herself on.
I said a terrible thing to Selina the other day. But I don't know what I'll do about it if you don't help me out, Jed.
I'll do anything I can. You know that, Mattie. What is the trouble? Just tell me, what is it?
His kindly voice, the goodwill, the affection beaming in his honest blue eyes, all gave Mattie renewed courage to go on with her self-imposed and most embarrassing task. Before she ended, her voice shook and dwindled away to such a low whisper that Jed had to bend his head close to hers to hear what she was saying.
I said. She goaded me into saying it, Jed. Slighting and slurring. Jeering at me because you were going away. I just got mad, Jed. And I told her you weren't going. That you and I. That we were to be married.
Mattie. Did you mean that? If you did, I'm the happiest man alive. I didn't dare presume. I didn't suppose you thought anything of me. But if you do, and if you want me, here's all there is of me. My heart and soul and body, forever and ever, as I've been all my life.
Thinking over this speech afterwards, Jed was not so happy with it. He thought he might have made it much more eloquent and romantic than it was. But it served the purpose very well. It was convincing, it came straight from his honest, stupid heart. And Mattie knew it. She held out her hands. And Jed, moving forwards, gathered her into his arms. It was certainly a most fortunate circumstance that the garden was well out of the range of Selina's vision. Or the sight of her sister and Jed repeating their performance, which many years ago had resulted in Jed's long banishment, might have caused Selina to commit almost any unheard of spiteful act as an outlet for her jealous anger. But only the few remaining garden flowers were witness to the lovers' indiscretion, and they kept their own secret counsel after the manner of flowers. And so Selina's feelings were mercifully spared this further outrage. That evening, Jed drove slowly away through the twilight, mounted for the last time on the tin wagon. He was so happy that he bore no grudge against even Selina Ford. As the pony climbed the poplar hill, Jed drew a long breath and freed his mind to the surrounding landscape, and then to his faithful and slow-plodding pony. Bud had been one of the main factors in this love affair. Throughout that beautiful summer, but had patiently carried Jed to and from the house of his lady-love. Jedediah was as full of happiness as any mortal man could be. His rosy thoughts flowed forth in a kind of a triumphant chant. What he spoke next would no doubt have driven Selina into fury, had she been able to hear it. What he said was but a poor expression of what he thought, but to the trees and fields and pony, he chanted.
Well, this is romance. What else would you call it now? Me, poor, scared to speak. And Matty ups and does it for me, bless her. Yes, I've been longing for romance all my life, and I've got it at last. None of your commonplace courtships for me, as I always said. Those were my very words. And I guess this has been a little uncommon, I guess it has. Anyhow, I'm uncommon happy. I never felt so romantic before. Today, I am the happiest man alive. Get up, my bud, get up.
We hope you liked listening to this story. You can find links to similar stories in this genre in the description box below. Thanks a lot for stopping by.